June 24th, 1944. Normandy. The morning light crept slowly across the French countryside, spreading over the soft, rolling fields and shattered hedgerows like a weary hand brushing across a wounded landscape. A thin mist clung to the earth, drifting through lanes scarred by tank tracks and craters. The air still smelled of damp soil, burned timber, and gunpowder from the battles that tore through the region in the days after the D-Day landings. A narrow sunken lane cut between two steep hedgerows near the village of Choux, just northwest of Cannes. The lane was barely wide enough for a farm cart, its walls built from centuries of growth, gnarled roots, thick underbrush, and compacted earth standing as tall as a man. It was a natural trench, dark and enclosed, guiding movement in a single direction like a tunnel carved by time itself. Inside that lane stood 12 British soldiers of the 1st Battalion, Hampshire Regiment. Their uniforms were damp from the night's humidity. Their boots were coated with mud. Their helmets were speckled with dust from collapsing hedgerow branches. They had formed an ambush position at 3:45, guided by intelligence that warned of German armor probing the British lines at dawn. They carried rifles, Bren guns, PIAT launchers, and a collection of explosives improvised from their limited supplies. They were infantry, not tank men, not engineers, not specialists. Just 12 soldiers holding a narrow corridor that German armor, if the reports were correct, would soon enter. Lance Corporal David Harper crouched near the forward bend in the lane, his uniform pressed into the soft earth. He was 26 years old, with the hardened expression of a man who had survived campaigns in North Africa and Sicily. But he knew Normandy was different. The fields here hid more than small arms fire. They hid armor. They hid entire companies of German tanks beneath the green crowns of hedgerows. Harper held a PIAT launcher against his chest, the awkward metal shape heavy in his hands. The projector infantry anti-tank was crude, unreliable, and difficult to aim. But at close range, very close, it could kill even a Panzer IV. It was the only anti-tank weapon the small group possessed, and it required courage to use. The PIAT did not reward hesitation. It demanded proximity and calm under conditions that punished both. Behind Harper, the rest of the squad silently prepared their positions. The hedgerow above them formed a thick canopy, concealing movement but allowing faint glimpses of the pale sky through irregular gaps in the leaves. Sergeant William Foster moved carefully along the line, checking spacing, confirming ammunition counts, repositioning men to ensure overlapping fields of fire. The British positions were dangerously close to the lane itself, but they needed to be. Long-range engagements were impossible in the bocage. Victory depended on precision, timing, and geography. The geography favored them now. The sunken lane turned sharply to the left, just 50 meters from their position. That bend would block the Germans' visibility. Tanks entering the turn would expose their side armor without warning. In that moment, a moment measured in seconds rather than minutes, the ambush could succeed or could fail. At 4:12, Harper felt a faint vibration run through the earth. It traveled through the wet soil, up his boots, into his legs. It was distant at first, soft, irregular, almost indistinguishable from the morning air's natural tremors. But Harper had felt this vibration before in Tunisia and near Catania. It was the signature of German tank engines. Maybach power plants, large ones. He pressed a gloved hand against the side of the lane to confirm. The vibration deepened. Dust loosened from the hedgerow wall. A few pebbles rolled down into the trench. The sound followed seconds later, still muted by distance, but unmistakable. The low, heavy resonance of multiple armored vehicles advancing along a hard-packed road. The German tanks were coming. Foster raised one hand, signaling his men to absolute stillness. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed loudly. The mist still drifted across the top of the hedgerow, slightly illuminated by the blue-gray light of approaching dawn. Somewhere beyond the lane, a bird called weakly, then fell silent as the engine noise thickened. The armored column approached at a steady pace, confident, uninterrupted, unconcerned. German crews expected little resistance here. The British front had been pressured for days by assaults from Panzer Lehr and the 12th SS Panzer Division. Reconnaissance earlier in the night suggested only light infantry screening this sector. To the Germans, advancing through another hedgerow corridor was routine. But the nature of the bocage ensured that nothing was routine. The first German vehicle appeared at 4:19. Harper watched from his concealed position, his eye peering through a small slit carved into the hedgerow. A Panzer IV rolled cautiously around the bend, its turret divided by the gun barrel, commander partially exposed above the cupola. Its tracks churned the soft ground as it entered the sunken lane. Mud clung to the hull and fenders. The tank carried the markings of Panzer Lehr, one of the most experienced armored divisions in the German army. Behind the first Panzer IV came another, then another. The low rumbling grew louder, resonating beneath the earth like rolling thunder. The tight confines of the lane magnified the sound, creating an echo chamber of metallic power. Then the fourth vehicle appeared, larger, heavier, its silhouette unmistakable even in the dim dawn. A Panther, Panzer V, its long 75mm KWK 42 gun protruded menacingly into the lane, cutting a dark shape through the mist as it approached the turn. The Panther's hull was broader and taller than the Panzer IVs. Its sloped armor glistened faintly with dew. It moved with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. And why not? The Panther had earned its reputation on the Eastern Front, where Soviet T-34s fell before its gun at long ranges. But this lane was not the Eastern Front. The hedgerows were not open fields. The visibility here measured in meters, not kilometers. And the Panther's strength at range was irrelevant in a corridor where it could not see 40 meters ahead. The 12 British soldiers remained invisible. Harper felt his pulse slow, not quicken. Training took over. The tank commander of the 1st Panzer scanned the lane ahead, but saw nothing. The hedgerow concealed everything except the rough outline of the road. The tank advanced deeper into the kill zone, turret aligned forward, gun depressed slightly. Harper tightened his grip on the PIAT. He calculated the distance. 16 meters, half the length of the lane. Close enough. Foster gave a silent signal with 2 raised fingers. Wait. The Panzer IV moved another 2 meters forward. Now the tank fully exposed its flank to the hedgerow line. Its armor, while adequate at range, thinned noticeably along the sides. German designers had prioritized frontal protection. Side armor mattered less when fighting in open plains, where enemy tanks rarely struck from the flanks without warning. But this was a hedge-lined ambush corridor, a kill box carved from ancient growth. Harper exhaled slowly. Foster dropped his hand. The ambush began. The PIAT fired with a harsh metallic thump. The bomb arced slightly before striking the Panzer IV side armor just behind the road wheels. The explosion tore through the hull. Flames erupted instantly from the engine compartment. The tank jerked violently and stopped, smoke pouring from the access panels. The 2nd Panzer IV halted in confusion, its commander ducking behind the turret armor. The gun began to traverse, moving toward the hedgerow that concealed the British. But the Bren gunners were already firing. Tracer rounds streaked through the lane, striking optics, periscopes, and exposed plates. The commander's hatch slammed shut. The tank rotated blindly, unsure of the ambush's direction, its turret moving in wide, uncertain arcs. Harper reloaded the PIAT with practiced speed, pulling the spring-loaded mechanism into firing position. It was a cumbersome weapon, awkward and heavy, but in trained hands it could turn confined terrain into an anti-tank zone. The 2nd PIAT shot slammed into the Panzer IVs turret ring. The explosion blew fragments of armor skyward. Smoke billowed from the breach. The crew inside had no chance to react. 2 tanks destroyed, The Panther, still behind the turn, had not yet entered the kill zone. Its commander, hearing the blasts, ordered an immediate halt and attempted to reverse out of the corridor. But the lane was too narrow. The turns angled too tight. The Panther could not maneuver. The vehicles behind it prevented a clean withdrawal. For the first time that morning, the German column hesitated. The infantry accompanying the tanks could not advance. They were trapped behind steel giants, unsure whether to push forward or retreat. Harper steadied his breathing. Sweat dampened his uniform despite the cool air. He moved along the hedgerow to prepare a third shot. The lane echoed with metallic groans, engine revs, and the escalating sound of combustion from the burning tanks. The Panther finally committed, its driver shifting gears, engine roaring as it advanced toward the site of the explosions. The long gun barrel cut into the space between the hedgerows like a spear emerging from a cave. Its presence alone changed the atmosphere. This was no ordinary tank. This was a weapon designed to dominate. But dominance required visibility. And here, in this narrow corridor barely wider than a farmhouse hallway, visibility belonged to the ambushers. Harper positioned himself precisely at the angle where the Panther's flank would appear. He steadied the PIAT against his shoulder. Foster watched from behind, understanding that this moment would determine the outcome of the ambush. At 4:23, the Panther revealed itself fully, advancing into the kill zone. The British soldiers held their breath. Harper fired. The PIAT bomb hit the Panther's lower hull, striking at the angle where the armor sloped toward the tracks. The explosion cracked open part of the plate, forcing the Panther to lurch violently to the left. Flames burst from the ruptured side. The ambush was working. The German column was collapsing, and the 12 British soldiers, hidden by hedgerows older than any war, had just shattered the spearhead of a Panzer advance in less than 4 minutes. The ambush at the sunken lane near did not occur in isolation. It was the product of weeks of fighting, months of planning, and years of lessons learned across continents. To understand how 12 British soldiers managed to halt a German armored spearhead in minutes, one must trace the path that brought both forces to that narrow corridor in June 1944. After the D-Day landings on June 6th, Allied forces pushed inland with cautious optimism. The beaches had been secured at immense cost. Now the task was to expand the bridgehead, secure critical roads, and push toward Cannes, an objective assigned to the British and Canadian armies. Cannes held strategic value beyond its historical significance. It was the gateway to the plains of northern France, a flat expanse ideal for armored movement. British commanders needed Cannes to maneuver tanks effectively, to break out from the bocage, and to threaten German supply routes deeper inland. But the Germans understood this as well. The area surrounding Cannes soon became one of the most fiercely contested regions in Normandy. German armored divisions, Panzerlehr, 21st Panzer, and the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, converged on the sector, determined to contain the British advance. These divisions carried experience from the Eastern Front, training steeped in mobile warfare, and equipment that inspired respect and caution among Allied tank crews. Panzerlehr, perhaps the most elite armored division in the German order of battle, arrived in Normandy with a reputation for discipline and speed. Its tanks were well maintained. Its crews were seasoned. Its officers were veterans of campaigns from Poland to Russia. Though weakened by Allied air attacks prior to the landings, the division remained formidable. The bocage terrain, however, reshaped everything. Trenches of earth disguised as hedgerows created a labyrinth. Each field was a fortress. Each lane was a choke point. A tank could advance only by exposing itself to hidden threats inches beyond its line of sight. German crews accustomed to long-range engagements now found themselves forced into close-quarters duels where reaction speed mattered more than armor thickness. Meanwhile, British troops learned to adapt quickly. Their infantry units employed the landscape as a weapon, using natural cover and precise timing to counter the overwhelming force of German armor. In such conditions, small numbers could control narrow passages. 12 soldiers could hold ground that a company might fail to secure in open terrain. In the days after D-Day, the front line around Choux shifted constantly. British infantry pushed forward, only to encounter fierce German counterattacks supported by armor. Villages changed hands multiple times. Artillery duels shook the earth. RAF Typhoons strafed German positions whenever weather allowed, but cloudy skies often hid the battlefield from aircraft. The British 1st Battalion, Hampshire Regiment, had advanced steadily toward Choux in mid-June. They encountered pockets of resistance in orchards, farmyards, and narrow roads lined with stone walls. Casualties mounted. Supplies ran thin. Exhaustion spread, but the regiment held its momentum, driven by the need to consolidate the bridgehead before German reinforcements could stabilize the front. On June 22nd, the German High Command ordered a series of counterattacks aimed at driving a wedge between British forces advancing around Choux. The attacks would be spearheaded by Panzer, supported by elements of the 12th SS Panzer Division. Their objective was to push the British back toward the beaches, disrupt logistics, and delay Allied plans to encircle Caen. British intelligence intercepted limited signals regarding the counterattack. Scouts reported increased German movement east of Tilly-sur-Seulles. Infantry units experienced heavier probing attacks along their lines. Tank engines were heard at night, their low rumble echoing through hedgerow corridors like a distant storm. Significantly, the Germans believed the British defensive positions near Choux to be weaker than they were. The terrain concealed the true disposition of British forces. The hedgerows hid troop density, weapons, and the direction of retreat paths. To the Germans, the attempt to push through Choux seemed possible, even likely. The British platoon assigned to the sunken lane near Choux received its orders just before dusk on June 23rd. Their task was simple but crucial: block any German armor attempting to break through the lane leading toward the rear supply routes. 12 soldiers were all that could be spared. Other units were engaged in fierce fighting on adjacent fronts, leaving the lane dangerously underdefended. But what the British lacked in numbers, they compensated for with terrain. The lane's shape, depth, and concealment created a natural choke point. If the Germans attempted to advance through it, they would be unable to maneuver, reverse, or deploy infantry efficiently. The British understood this. They had seen similar terrain used effectively by the Germans in preceding days. Sergeant William Foster studied the lane carefully upon arrival. Years of military experience, combined with an intuitive sense of battlefield geometry, told him the position could be held if his men remained unseen, disciplined, and synchronized. The hedgerow at the bend provided total cover. The narrow floor of the lane forced the tanks to expose their flanks. The steep walls prevented rapid response. The stakes were clear. If German tanks broke through, they could sweep into lightly defended rear areas, collapsing the British push toward Choux and threatening the entire left flank. A breakthrough here could unravel days of progress and allow German forces to counterattack with momentum. For the Germans, the lane represented opportunity. A successful advance through it would put British defenses in disarray, freeing their armor to press deeper into the Allied lines. The Panther and the Spearhead was intended to lead a decisive push. Its long-range firepower, thick frontal armor, and mechanical reliability made it a formidable threat, even when navigating constricted terrain. Yet the Germans underestimated the nature of the bocage. They underestimated the British soldiers holding the lane. And above all, they underestimated how quickly a well-prepared ambush could turn a column of armored vehicles into a sequence of wrecks blocking their own advance. Inside the tank formations moving toward Choux, German crews felt confident. Their engines thrummed with steady reliability. The Panther's gun was loaded with armor-piercing rounds, its optics clear, its turret crew alert. The Panzer IVs accompanying it followed standard formation, maintaining spacing appropriate for open terrain but dangerously inadequate for hedgerow fighting. The German column approached the sunken lane unaware of the 12 silent figures waiting on the other side of the bend. As the tanks rolled through the early light, they carried more than steel. They carried assumptions shaped by years of battlefield superiority, assumptions about Allied capabilities, assumptions that the bocage, though restrictive, could be managed by disciplined advance. Those assumptions would be shattered within minutes. The British soldiers waded through the night and into the dawn. Their uniforms grew damp. Insects crawled across their equipment. The cold of the pre-dawn hours gnawed at their fingers despite the summer season. But they held position without complaint. They arranged their weapons precisely. They memorized the plan. They understood the consequences of failure. Harper checked his PIAT repeatedly, ensuring its spring mechanism remained engaged. The PIAT demanded trust that it would fire, trust that its unguided bomb would reach the target, trust that its limited range would not become a death sentence. A missed shot would draw immediate attention. A dud would mean disaster. Foster studied the lane again and again, calculating angles, distances, and the approximate time it would take for the German column to advance from the previous reported position. He trained his men to hold fire until the exact moment tanks reached the pre-designated point. The platoon had not slept. They had not spoken aloud. Every sound was measured, every movement deliberate. The first vibrations reached the hedgerow shortly after 4 in the morning. Harper recognized the pattern instantly. Multiple tracked vehicles moving in formation. German armor, heavy, confident. As the rumble grew louder, the British soldiers pressed into their positions. Fingers tightened around weapons. Hearts steadied. The mist above the hedgerow thickened with the warmth of the rising sun. Panzer tracks cut into the earth long before the tanks were visible. Then the first silhouette emerged around the bend. The ambush had begun its final countdown. The British were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing one of the most feared armored formations in Normandy. Yet they possessed 3 advantages: terrain, concealment, and timing. These were enough. Within minutes, the balance of power would shift sharply. German confidence would transition to shock. The forward momentum of the advance would collapse, and the actions of 12 soldiers would shape the battlefield far beyond the narrow confines of the sunken lane. The Panther appeared first. It emerged through the morning haze like a dark shape rising from the earth itself. Its long-barreled 75mm KWK 42 gun cutting a silhouette both elegant and lethal. The tank's broad turret cast a shadow across the lane, while its angled glassy plate glimmered faintly with condensation. To the German crew inside, this narrow corridor marked simply another obstacle to push through on their advance toward show. To the British soldiers watching from the hedgerow, it marked the opening act of a confrontation that would decide the fate of the next several hours of battle. The Panther moved slowly. Its commander remained cautious, navigating the tight confines, rotating the cupola to both sides to check for signs of resistance. But the mist obscured visibility. The hedgerows concealed everything except the lane itself. What lay beyond the bend ahead remained hidden. Behind the Panther, the 1st Panzer IV approached at a steady pace, maintaining formation distance. Its shorter, stub-nosed profile contrasted with the sleek lines of the Panther. Together, the vehicles represented a combined arms threat tailored for breakthrough. The Panther would lead the Spearhead. The Panzer IVs would exploit the breach, supporting infantry and clearing defensive positions. But none of the German armor could maneuver within the lane. The earth walls loomed high on either side, restricting visibility and eliminating lateral movement. The column was committed to a single axis. Once inside the corridor, they entered a kill zone they could not exit without reversing. The tension among the British soldiers grew with each meter of the German advance. The ground trembled beneath their boots. Loose soil shifted. The hedgerows vibrated with the rhythmic clatter of tracks compressing the earth. Harper braced himself against the embankment. The PIAT rested across his lap, its weight solid, its quirks familiar. Foster observed the German movement with a level gaze. He measured the timing precisely. The Panther needed to advance another 2 meters to align perfectly with the bend. Only then would the crew expose their vulnerable side to the concealed British position. Seconds passed in slow, heavy silence. Then the Panther reached the point Foster had anticipated. He raised his hand slightly. Harper breathed once, steadying his mind, his shoulder, his aim. The PIAT fired. The spring-loaded launcher recoiled sharply into Harper's shoulder, delivering a jolt that echoed through muscle and bone. The bomb arced across the narrow distance, its flight path short but decisive. The explosion followed instantly, a violent flash against the Panther's flank. A plume of black smoke swirled upward. The blast shook the lane, momentarily drowning out the sound of engines. The Panther lurched sideways. Its tracks ground against the embankment. The turret jerked as if startled. Gauges inside the tank flickered. The bomb had not penetrated the thickest front armor, but it had struck the lower hull plating at the precise angle Harper had calculated. Fire blossomed beneath the turret ring. Smoke escaped from ventilation openings. Harper did not celebrate. He reloaded with mechanical motion, knowing the next shot must come quickly. The German column reacted instantly. The Panzer IV behind the Panther attempted to halt, but the restricted lane prevented rapid braking. The tank's momentum carried it forward into the Panther's rear hull, producing a grinding metallic impact. Sparks flew from the contact. Mud sprayed outward. The German crews shouted over internal intercoms as they tried to understand the source of the attack. The 3rd Panzer IV stopped abruptly as well, its tracks biting into the soft earth. For a moment, confusion reigned. The Germans saw no enemy, no Musleflasses, no infantry, only the twisting hedgerow and the narrow lane ahead. The terrain betrayed them entirely. Foster's men began their coordinated assault. Grenades flew in arcs, landing precisely behind the Panther and between the first 2 Panzer IVs. The detonations ripped through exposed fittings and tore shrapnel across the vehicle's upper structures. Dust and smoke filled the corridor. The Panther's turret began to rotate slowly toward the hedgerow. The crew inside fought to bring the long barrel to bear, knowing they had only seconds to locate the attackers. Harper fired his second PIAT bomb at the moment the turret exposed its side plates. The weapon's recoil struck with punishing force. The bomb hit the Panther's turret just below the cupola. A concussive burst followed. Smoke filled the cupola vision slits. The turret froze in place. Inside, the crew fought to react, but the PIAT bombardment had disabled the traverse motor. Flames flickered across ammunition racks. The commander banged against the hatch mechanisms in sudden desperation. The Panther, once the spearhead of the German advance, now sat motionless, burning, blocking the entire column. Behind it, the 1st Panzer IV attempted to reverse, but its tracks slipped in the churned mud created by the collision with the Panther. The narrow lane prevented any turning movement. The tank could only push backward, blindly, scraping the embankment wall. But Foster had anticipated this response. Corporal Jameson positioned himself further down the hedgerow. His Bren gun rested against a sandbag, oriented at the Panzer IV's vulnerable engine deck as it struggled. Jameson opened fire, sending controlled bursts across the rear compartment grills. Incendiary rounds pierced the vents, igniting fuel vapors. The engine began to smoke. Inside, panic spread among the German crew. They felt the sudden heat. They heard the mechanical cough of a failing engine. The tank's interior lights dimmed. The driver attempted to restart the failing motor, but flames erupted through the ventilation slits, filling the compartment with thick, breath-stealing smoke. The critical moment arrived. The German Spearhead was immobilized. Their formation backed up. Their engines struggled. Their visibility remained non-existent. They still had not identified the location of the British ambushers. Every second they spent in confusion drew them deeper into vulnerability. Foster signaled again. The British soldiers intensified their fire. Rifle shots cracked out in rapid sequence. Grenades detonated with rhythmic pulses. Jameson maintained suppression on the 1st Panzer IV, preventing any crew from escaping. The tank's engine compartment glowed red as flames spread beneath the armored shroud. The 2nd Panzer IV attempted to maneuver forward, desperate to force its way past the immobilized vehicles. Its tracks bit into the earth with grinding aggression. The turret rotated in search of targets. The gun elevated toward the hedgerow, firing a high-explosive round blindly into the vegetation. The explosion tore branches apart, but failed to strike any British position. The act of firing, however, exposed the Panzer IVs' flank. Harper reloaded again, ignoring the sharp pain accumulating in his shoulder. The PIAT's weight dug into his fatigues. He sighted along the crude iron aiming strip at the Panzer IV side armor near the suspension. The lane magnified every sound. Harper heard his own breath, the whine of strained engines, the distant rumble of artillery. He felt the heat of burning fuel radiating from the Panther wreck. He fired the PIAT. The bomb slammed into the Panzer IV's hull, just above the 2nd road wheel. The explosion tore through the thinner side armor. Shrapnel penetrated the fighting compartment. Flames emerged from beneath the turret ring. The turret jerked violently, jamming halfway through rotation. Smoke billowed inside the tank. The crew scrambled to open their hatches, but Foster's men anticipated the attempt. A hail of small arms fire forced the hatches shut. The burning Panzer IV became a steel furnace. 2 German tanks destroyed. 1 blocked permanently. The column's momentum shattered. The German infantry, accompanying the tanks, attempted to deploy from the rear vehicles. But the lane's design forced them into disorganized, staggered movement. The earth walls hemmed them in, leaving no room to spread out or take cover. They found themselves exposed as they jumped from their half-tracks, landing in mud already slick with spilled fuel. Foster directed his men to shift their fire. Controlled volleys tore into the dismounted infantry, pinning them in place. The Germans attempted to return fire, but their angles were limited. Their weapons clattered against the embankment as they tried to acquire targets hidden above them. The 3rd Panzer IV, still intact, attempted to reverse out of the lane, but the German infantry in the rear blocked its path, creating chaos as men and machine collided in desperation. The tank's driver attempted to push backward anyway, pressing the infantry dangerously close to the embankment. Foster recognized the opportunity. He motioned for Private Clark, who carried the remaining PIAT bombs. Clark braced his feet against the hedgerow roots and prepared to support Harper's next attempt. Harper fired again. The 3rd bomb streaked toward the Panzer IV's turret. It exploded just beneath the commander's cupola. The blast cracked the turret armor and sent fragments inward. The tank ceased movement. Smoke leaked from the hatches. The crew's frantic motions inside created shadows that flickered against the vision slits. 3 German tanks destroyed or disabled in rapid succession. The 4th vehicle in the Spearhead, a Panzer IV variant equipped with additional side armor, remained operational. Its commander understood the danger with grim clarity. He ordered the driver to push forward, attempting to clear the lane by forcing the burning Panther aside. The tank's tracks churned aggressively. The engine roared. The tank pressed its hull against the Panther's rear armor, trying to shift the burning wreck enough to squeeze past. But the Panther's weight and the narrow lane width defeated the attempt. The Panzer IV's tracks spun uselessly, sending mud and smoke into the air. Harper was out of PIAT bombs. Yet Foster had one final tactic. He allowed the Panzer IV to strain against the Panther's hull, then signaled his men to reposition. They shifted silently toward the flank, moving along the hedge line. Private Gallagher crawled forward with 2 sticky grenades secured to his harness. Foster motioned for him to throw. Gallagher lobbed the first grenade into the narrow gap between the Panzer IVs tracks and hull. The explosion ripped into the suspension system, breaking the idler wheel. The tank lurched immobile. The second grenade followed moments later, thrown onto the engine deck. Flames erupted. The engine compartment filled with smoke. The last operational tank of the Spearhead fell silent. Within minutes, the German advance had collapsed entirely. For tanks destroyed or disabled, infantry pinned, vehicles blocking one another in a lane that now served as a tomb for the German Spearhead. Foster studied the destruction through a haze of smoke. The air burned with the smell of diesel, cordite, and torn vegetation. His men remained focused, weapons ready, nerves steady. But they understood what they had accomplished. 12 soldiers had shattered an armored thrust designed to break through the British front. What happened next would determine whether this triumph could be sustained or whether German reinforcements would arrive to attempt another advance. But the Spearhead was gone, and the battlefield belonged to the British. The destruction of the German Spearhead should have marked the end of the fighting along the sunken lane. The burning Panther blocked the path entirely. The 3 ruined Panzer IVs behind it sealed the corridor from both retreat and reinforcement. German infantry, trapped between wrecks, tried to reorganize, but the narrow strip of churned mud left little room for movement. Smoke from burning fuel and ammunition rolled through the lane like a slow-moving tide. The air trembled with the constant crackle of flames consuming steel. Yet the battle was not finished. The Germans were not prepared to abandon their objective so quickly. A Spearhead could be replaced. Vehicles could be retrieved or left behind. But the lane led directly toward the British rear. If they could break through elsewhere, if they could breach the hedgerow from another direction, they could flank the defenders and sweep into the village of Scho. The German commander overseeing the counterattack understood the critical value of this lane. When reports came in that the lead tanks had been disabled, he did not assume defeat. He assumed the need for escalation. He ordered the accompanying infantry company to advance through the fields on either side of the lane. Their task was simple: destroy the British ambush party, clear the hedgerow, and allow engineers to cut a new path for the remaining armor. The British soldiers at the lane did not know how many Germans remained beyond the crest. They heard only the shifting patterns of distant movement, the clatter of rifles, the muted shouts of officers, the rustle of dozens of boots passing through wheat fields crushed by mechanized advance. The German infantry were regrouping, attempting to flank. Foster understood the threat immediately. The 12 soldiers had achieved the impossible, but their position was fragile. The hedgerow provided concealment, but not invulnerability. A concentrated infantry assault could envelop the lane from multiple directions. Mortar fire could collapse the earth walls and bury the defenders. Machine gun teams could rake the hedgerow and force the British into the open. The Panther burned hotter. The ammunition inside began to cook off, popping sporadically as each round ignited in the heat. Flames licked the edges of the turret. Acrid smoke drifted over the hedgerow, casting long shadows through the field. The wrecked tank, once a symbol of German armored dominance, now served as both shield and hazard. Foster crawled along the hedgerow, checking each soldier's position. Their ammunition was limited. Their grenades were few. The PIAT had performed its purpose, but its usefulness in a prolonged infantry battle was minimal. The terrain that gave them victory over the tanks could now become a trap. The very embankment that concealed them could collapse under bombardment or hide advancing German riflemen until they were dangerously close. As the smoke thinned momentarily, Foster caught sight of movement in the fields. Dark shapes advancing between rows of hedgerows. German infantry, dozens of them, moving with methodical precision. The counterattack had begun. Machine gun fire struck the hedgerow in controlled bursts. Leaves shredded, branches snapped. Earth erupted where bullets struck the embankment. The British soldiers pressed low, their bodies embedded into the soil, feeling each vibration of incoming fire. Jameson shifted his Bren gun, adjusting his angle. His magazine clinked softly as he steadied it. Foster signaled for controlled fire, short bursts, no waste. Jameson obeyed. His Bren barked with suppressed thunder. The weapon spat rounds across the field, cutting through the haze and forcing the advancing Germans to drop into cover. The Germans responded with their own suppression fire. MG-42 teams spread out along the flanking hedgerows, their barrels glowing as they unleashed rapid volleys. The weapon's distinctive rhythm echoed across the battlefield, its rounds carved through vegetation with relentless speed. The British soldiers ducked deeper into the embankment. Bullets hissed overhead, slicing through brush. Soil rained down with each impact, but Foster's men did not break. They had expected this. The Germans had to attack. The collapse of their Spearhead demanded retaliation. Foster conserved his ammunition. Each rifle shot was deliberate. Each Bren burst was measured. The PIAT, now empty, rested against the embankment, its role completed. German infantry advanced in staggered formation. Their helmets bobbed between stalks of wheat. Their boots crushed through furrows softened by overnight rain. Their rifles glinted faintly in the early morning light. They pressed forward with discipline, careful not to expose themselves unnecessarily. A mortar round landed behind the British line, throwing soil and leaves into the air. The blast shuddered through the hedgerow. Foster felt the shock wave in his chest. Another explosion followed, closer. The second round tore a divot from the embankment, scattering clumps of earth across the lane. The mortar fire intensified. Each explosion erupted with a deafening roar, sending shrapnel whistling in unpredictable arcs. The hedgerow absorbed much of the fragmentation, but splinters of wood and rock flew like darts. Foster shielded his face with his arm as a burst of debris struck across the lane. The Germans pressed forward, using the mortar barrage as cover. Their movements became more aggressive. They advanced in clusters, bounding between positions. Their rifles cracked with increasing frequency. Jameson shifted his Bren gun again, tracking target after target. His burst cut into the German ranks, forcing them to drop or retreat. But every burst depleted his precious ammunition. Harper, his shoulders still bruised from the PIAT's recoil, grabbed his Lee, infield, and joined the defensive fire. His shots were steady, his breathing controlled. He fired only when he saw clear silhouettes. The rifle's bolt action cycled repeatedly, each metallic click punctuating the chaos. The Germans attempted a push along the left flank. They moved along a secondary hedgerow, crawling through undergrowth. Their rifles protruded through gaps in the foliage, ready to fire the moment a British position revealed itself. Foster recognized the danger. He ordered his nearest soldiers to reposition, shifting their fire to the encroaching threat. Grenades arced through the air, landing among the advancing infantry. The explosions disrupted their assault, scattering them back into the hedgerow. The German push faltered, but only for a moment. More infantry advanced behind the first wave. They stepped over the fallen, pressed along the flanks, and moved with renewed urgency. Their objective was clear: destroy the British ambushers before reinforcements could arrive. The smoke from the burning tanks thickened once more. Flames intensified inside the Panther's hull. The ammunition rack erupted in a bright flash, sending a plume of flame and debris skyward. The explosion echoed across the fields, momentarily stunning both sides. The blast shook the embankment. Heat radiated intense and immediate. The Germans used the moment of shock to launch a new assault. A squad sprinted across the open field toward the hedgerow, seeking to overwhelm it with sheer speed. Foster responded instantly. He ordered everyone to focus fire. A storm of bullets met the charge. The attackers faltered. Some fell. Others dived into the mud and attempted to crawl forward. Harper, breathing hard, reloaded with shaking fingers and fired again. Then another mortar round struck the hedgerow. The blast was devastating. Soil collapsed inward. Roots snapped. A section of the embankment gave way, spilling earth into the lane. Foster shielded his head as debris rained down. When the dust cleared, he saw that one of his soldiers, Private Simmons, had been partially buried. Foster dragged him free, though Simmons was no longer responsive. The blast had struck too close. The British line constricted. Their cover thinned. The Germans pressed forward with renewed determination, sensing a chance to break the ambush. Foster surveyed his men. Exhaustion showed in their faces. Sweat and dirt streaked across their uniforms. Ammunition pouches hung nearly empty. Yet their posture remained steady. Their eyes remained focused. They knew the importance of holding this position. The German infantry advanced again, now in greater numbers. Machine gun fire cut across the hedgerow. Rifle shots cracked. Mortar blasts shook the ground. The battlefield roared with relentless violence. But then, faintly at first, a new sound emerged, a distant engine whine, steady and familiar. British reinforcements were arriving. The sound grew louder, cutting through the clamor of battle. The German infantry hesitated. Their fire weakened momentarily as they tried to identify the source. Through the gaps in the hedgerow, Foster glimpsed shadows moving fast along the distant ridge. An armored car, then another. Behind them, the silhouettes of Churchill tanks approached, their heavy frames moving with deliberate purpose. The Germans faltered. The counterattack had run out of time. Foster's men maintained pressure. They fired their remaining ammunition with precision, slowing the German withdrawal. The Panther continued to burn, serving as both landmark and warning. As the first Churchill tank crested the ridge, its 75mm gun trained toward the fields, the German infantry began to pull back. Their orderly retreat shifted into disarray. They dragged wounded comrades. They abandoned positions. They slipped into the hedgerows, disappearing into the maze of fields. The British reinforcements pressed forward. Their engines rumbled with authority. The ground trembled beneath them. Their arrival sealed the outcome. The Germans withdrew completely. The battle ended not with a final explosion, but with the slow recession of enemy movement into the fog-covered distance. The smoke lingered. The flames flickered. The air carried a heavy silence, broken only by the crackle of burning steel. The 12 soldiers had held the lane. The spearhead was shattered, and the German assault had collapsed. The battlefield grew quiet only slowly. Long after the German infantry had withdrawn into the hedgerows, after the distant rumble of engines faded beyond the tree line, after the last mortar thuds disappeared into the morning haze, the silence remained heavy, strained, incomplete. Smoke twisted above the shattered armored column like a dark banner. Flames from the Panther flickered with dying intensity, their glow reflecting across the scorched earth in trembling waves. Foster stood at the edge of the lane and surveyed the destruction. The corridor that had moments earlier threatened to become a route of German exploitation was now choked with wrecks. Steel hulks locked in violent poses, their tracks broken, their turrets charred, their hulls scarred by blast and fire. The narrow walls that once directed German armor forward now trapped it in place. The sunken lane had become a tomb. The smell of burning fuel mixed with the earthy scent of torn soil. Thin smoke drifted across the fields, dissipating slowly into the damp morning air. Shell fragments lay scattered like dark petals along the lane's floor. Metallic groans issued intermittently from the wrecks as flames softened rivets and twisted internal supports. The British reinforcements, having secured the surrounding sectors, arrived with careful precision. Churchill tanks rolled forward, their heavy tracks flattening brush and soil beneath their weight. Armored cars swept the flanks, ensuring no hidden German infantry remained. Infantry companies advanced in deliberate formations, their weapons ready, their eyes scanning the hedgerows with caution. But the fighting had ended. The reinforcements found Foster's men still in the hedgerow, positions intact despite the punishing mortar barrage. Sweat and dirt clung to their uniforms. Their faces carried the unmistakable strain of prolonged battle. Their rifles lay empty or nearly so. Their pouches sagged, drained of ammunition, yet their posture remained upright. They had endured, and they had prevailed. Medics moved through the embankment, tending to the wounded. They examined Simmons first. His uniform was torn. His helmet lay, crushed beneath a chunk of collapsed embankment. Despite their efforts, there was nothing they could do. The mortar blast had struck too close, too violently. The medics covered him gently with his own field dressing, leaving his body to rest where he had fought. Foster felt the loss deeply. The platoon had arrived with 12 men. They now had 11. One life taken in the narrow gap between chaos and triumph. One name that would be carried forward in the memories of those who survived. One absence that would linger in the stories told after the war. Harper's shoulder bore a severe bruise from the PIAT's recoil, purple, swollen, and stiff. But he remained focused, watching the Churchill tanks as they edged closer to the destroyed Panther. He had been the one to fire the first shot, the one that had transformed the lane from a path of German advance into a trap. His accuracy had turned the tide, yet his expression carried no triumph, only quiet exhaustion. The British officers arriving with reinforcements paused at the sight of the wreckage. They studied the ruined tanks, taking note of the patterns of destruction, the angles of impact, the complete obliteration of the Spearhead. They realized something significant had occurred, something rare, something decisive, something that defied the numbers. An armored assault, spearheaded by one of Germany's most feared tanks, had been stopped not by another armored force, not by air support, not by overwhelming artillery, but by 12 infantrymen with limited resources, a few grenades, a Bren gun, and a PIAT. It was almost unheard of. Engineers approached to assess the damage. They examined the Panther's hull, its armor blackened and warped by flames. They inspected the Panzer IVs crushed behind it, their turrets fused in awkward rotations. They mapped out how to clear the lane, though it would take time. For now, the wrecks would remain, blocking the corridor and marking the site of one of the most extraordinary stands in the sector. Intelligence officers soon arrived as well. They documented the destroyed tanks, photographed impact angles, measured blast radii, and recorded weapon performance. The PIAT's effectiveness impressed them. The angles of penetration, the secondary fires, and the structural failures all pointed to the ambush's precision. They interviewed Foster and his surviving men. Each account added clarity to the sequence of events. The officers wrote notes quickly, their pencils scratching across paper as they traced the moments from first contact to final withdrawal. Their questions came calmly, methodically, ensuring the details would not be lost. The intelligence officers were trained to interpret battlefield outcomes, but even they paused at the magnitude of what had happened. The ambush had not simply delayed a German attack. It had dismantled it entirely. The Spearhead, designed to break through the British line, had been destroyed in minutes. As British forces consolidated the newly secured sector, word of the ambush began to spread. Officers shared the story during briefings, describing how 12 soldiers had halted a German armored advance with speed and precision. Other platoons, hearing the accounts secondhand, repeated it with growing amazement. By afternoon, the lane near Shu had become a topic of discussion throughout the regiment. Yet Foster felt no desire for recognition. He stood quietly beside the hedgerow, reflecting on the weight of the moment. The outcome had been shaped by preparation, terrain, timing, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. But it carried a cost. Simmons' still form reminded him that every victory demanded sacrifice. Harper sat nearby, leaning against the embankment. His uniform was soaked with sweat, streaked with soot, and torn along the sleeve. His PIAT lay on the ground beside him, spent, dented, and covered in mud. Foster approached him briefly, nodding in acknowledgement of his crucial role. Harper nodded back, his breathing slow and measured. Jameson inspected his Bren gun, ensuring the barrel had not warped under sustained fire. He counted his remaining rounds, only a handful. His precise bursts had kept the German infantry from overwhelming the hedgerow during the counterattack. Without his discipline, the Germans might have breached the line, turning the tide once more. The remaining soldiers checked each other's injuries, patched minor wounds, and whispered quiet assurances. The adrenaline had faded. The exhaustion returned. The knowledge of survival settled heavily upon them. As the sun climbed higher, the morning fog burned away. The battlefield became clearer. The lanes stretched outward in both directions, still flanked by high hedgerows. Birds returned to the branches. Insects buzzed lazily through the air. The strange stillness of post-battle calm descended. Foster walked slowly down the lane, examining each destroyed tank. The Panther's turret had cracked from internal explosions. Its barrel sagged downward, heat softened and buckled. The hull bore the unmistakable scars of the PIAT, each crater marking the precise moments that had turned the tide. He continued to the first Panzer IV, its engine deck split open by Bren fire. The flames had consumed the interior. Ash drifted from the hatch like dark snow. The smell of charred metal lingered. The second Panzer IV lay at an angle, its turret jammed. The third sat half buried in mud, crippled by grenade blasts. The fourth remained locked against the Panther's hull, its tracks broken, its engine blackened. For tanks destroyed in minutes. The evidence of British precision remained etched across every surface. When Foster reached the far end of the lane, he paused. The fields beyond stretched in gentle waves, their grass swaying in the morning breeze. The German infantry had withdrawn into that landscape, unseen but not forgotten. Their attack had failed, but the war continued. The front line would shift again. New orders would come. New battles would arise. The victory at the Lane was decisive, but temporary. Every triumph in Normandy demanded another. Every foothold required reinforcement. Every day brought new dangers. Yet something about this moment remained distinct. The Lane marked a place where the impossible had been achieved. A place where the expected outcome had inverted. A place where ordinary soldiers had stood against overwhelming force and held their ground. The reflections came slowly, shaped by fatigue, silence, and the weight of experience. War often favored numbers. It favored firepower. It favored armor. But on rare occasions, it favored courage sharpened by preparation. It favored men willing to remain motionless for hours in damp hedgerows. It favored steady hands holding rifles with dwindling ammunition. It favored instinct, discipline, and the refusal to break. 12 men had faced the spearhead of one of Germany's most respected armored formations. 12 had halted it entirely. Their resistance had prevented a breakthrough that might have unraveled the British advance in the sector. Their stand had safeguarded the flanks of units pushing toward Show. It had preserved momentum in a battle fought meter by meter, hedgerow by hedgerow. As the day unfolded, engineers cleared paths, medics tended to wounded, and officers updated their maps. The lane remained blocked, its Rex 2 entrenched to move immediately. Churchill tanks now patrolled the flanks, securing the area from any renewed assault. Foster gathered his surviving men. They stood for a moment in solemn recognition of Simmons' sacrifice. The medics prepared to move his body with care. Foster placed his helmet gently beside their comrade before stepping back. There were no speeches, no ceremony, only the quiet understanding shared by soldiers who had endured battle together. As afternoon shadows stretched across the hedgerows, the British troops prepared to move once more. Orders arrived for new positions, new defensive lines, new responsibilities. The war offered no long pause. Yet for a final moment, Foster turned back toward the sunken lane. The smoke had thinned. The flames had dimmed. The wrecked tanks cast long, jagged silhouettes across the ground. The air shimmered with heat rising from scorched armor. He took one last look, committing the scene to memory. For the rest of his life, he would remember it, not as a triumph of violence, but as a testament to what ordinary men could do when the moment demanded everything. A narrow corridor, a burning spearhead, 12 soldiers. For tanks stopped in minutes. The story would pass quietly at first, shared among units as a remarkable event. Later, historians would examine it, mapping each position, each explosion, each movement. But even their analysis could not fully capture the texture of those moments. The tension, the smoke, the fear held in silence, the grim certainty that success or failure rested on a single shot. The lane at Shub became more than a battlefield. It became a symbol of resilience. In the great scope of the Second World War, countless battles took place. Entire divisions clashed across continents. Strategic decisions reshaped nations. But sometimes history hinged on the actions of a handful of men in a single, narrow corner of a single French field. And in that place, on that morning, 12 British soldiers altered the shape of the day. They stood, they aimed, they held, and they stopped a German spearhead cold. The war would continue, but the memory of the lane would endure, quiet, steadfast, and unforgotten.